Bitcoin is this strange being. It really is. It violates everything we think we know about money. And it forces us to consider whether we actually understood money in the first place. So, do you remember when you were in school and you did that class about basic economics and money? No? You neither? We didn't do it either. You'd think that one of the world's most ancient technologies, one of the resounding artifacts of human civilization, currency, the system of trade that is the basis and dominates our lives in many ways, would be an important topic at school. Not one day. Maybe in some places you get a brief course in home economics or in history or something like that that gives you this vague idea about money that you really don't understand. Most of us cannot hold a 15-minute conversation with a 6-year-old about money because the 6-year-old has good questions and we have no answers. How does money work, Mommy? Well, the correct answer is, I have not a freaking clue, kid. I think it's something to do with the allocation of special drawing rights through the International Monetary Fund and World Bank in a free-floating system of market exchange currencies that compete through trade balances across an international spectrum of inflation-adjusted exchange rates that then can be used to create local debt that is issued by the Treasury in return for currency that is printed by the central bank, distributed to the banks that leverage it through a system of partial reserve leverage of approximately 10 to 1, and distribute it into the economy, creating either inflationary or deflationary effects, allowing us all to experience the velocity of trade through the exchange of an abstract token that represents the promise of future value depreciated by the rate of inflation and adjusted for the return on investment. So why can't we have more of it, Mommy? Why can't we just give everybody more of it? That conversation doesn't go that way. It usually goes, eat your breakfast, go to bed, clean your room. One day you'll understand. And that's the first lie, because you still don't understand. You ask the average person on the street, what gives value to money? Why does money have value? They have no idea. They have a theory. They have a fairy tale. They have a story. And that story is about as naive as believing that children come from storks that deliver them in bundles they drop through the chimney. It is about as solid as Santa Claus. What gives money value? But it says right there on the piece of paper, it says, by the full faith and credit of the Royal Bank of India. Or it says, by the full faith and credit of the Federal Reserve System. It says, one Federal Reserve note. Applies to all debt, public and private. Okay, this is what gives it value, a promise. But most people have no idea how that works. I guarantee you that if you ask the average person on the street, they will tell you that the reason the money has value is because somewhere there's a cave, a vault, a box, where the government keeps gold in direct proportion to the money that circulates, which has not been true since the 1930s, anywhere in the world. And yet, that is the Santa Claus fantasy that many people believe in. Or they believe that the government guarantees the value of money somehow, which then creates other interesting questions like, Well, why does inflation happen then? Why is the currency collapsing in Zimbabwe? Did the government not try hard enough to guarantee it? That is the inconvenient truth at the core of our understanding of the world's most ancient technology, money, is that we don't understand it. We simply don't understand it. The truth is, you give money value. Why? Because you are participating in a shared hallucination with 1.5 billion other people in which you firmly believe that tomorrow this money will still have value. That if you go to the store and present one of these colored pieces of paper, someone will give you eggs, chicken, spices, water, sugar, salt, housing, healthcare, something for this colored piece of paper. And it really takes an incredible hallucination for us to believe this, because the paper itself is worthless. It's pretty, but it's not pretty at that level. Nobody gives you products and services because of how pretty it is, right? That shared hallucination took hundreds of years to be established. And it started at some point in the late 15th century with the introduction of paper money, gold certificates, IOUs, certificates of exchange, bearer notes, etc. Pieces of paper that could be exchanged in promise for something else. And then, in the most amazing magical trick our societies have ever seen, they switch the cups around. And you lift the cup, and the ball isn't there. You go, what? This was supposed to be redeemable for an ounce of gold, a pound of silver, something. No, not anymore. It's just a piece of paper. What gives it value is your belief that tomorrow if you go to the store, you can buy something. And the moment that belief suffers a crack, it shatters. And you have very big problems. I mean, imagine some crazy scenario where the promise, the full faith and credit, one day turns into an announcement that as of 4 hours from now, these two pieces of colored paper have zero value. I mean, that couldn't possibly happen. But here's the interesting thing. If the value was based on the promise, and that promise is broken, and the people who gave that promise just told you, this now has value 0 in 4 hours, what is the value of that piece of paper? 0, right? But that's not what happened. It's not what happened at all. For months after that announcement was made, yes, the paper was valued less, 10% less, 15% less, 20% less, but it still had value. Even though the people who made the promise told you it was 0, you could exchange it for 80% of face value in one of the many available locations where corruption no longer exists and you can't exchange money, you know, all of that story. Unless, of course, you're connected and wealthy enough to afford the 20% depreciation. But it only depreciated by 20%, maximum. I bet you could still find some in circulation today. And I bet they still don't have value of 0. In fact, in the history of currencies, we rarely find any currency that goes to 0. I can go to Rome in Italy, and I can get silver coins that have the face of Julius Caesar on them. Coins that have not been in circulation for almost 1,000 years, and yet their value is not 0. In fact, their value exceeds their worth in silver. They're still a tradable abstraction of value. The reason your money did not go to 0 was because its value was not the promise. It's because its value was that illusion. And that illusion was shaken, but not destroyed. Because you start panicking at first. You're like, this has zero value. And then someone says to you, oh, don't worry. I know this guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who will give you 80% on it. And no longer has zero value. Now it's just depreciated. Because you give it value through your use. Because you give it value by believing in that promise. But in order for that promise to hold, it has to have some other characteristics. It has to be unforgeable. If it can be forged, then you have an emerging phenomenon that in economics is called Gresham's law, where bad money chases out good money. Where if you get your hands on the good money, you do not spend it. You stuff it under the mattress. Sounds familiar? Happened here. If you had an old note and a new note, there is no way you're spending the new note until you get rid of all of the old notes. So all the new notes disappear from circulation immediately. Their velocity goes to zero. And people trade the old note. But if they trade the old note, it's in circulation. And the longer it remains in circulation, the longer people hold on to it and hoard the new ones. Gresham's law in action. I did not believe I would see that in my lifetime. Thank you, India, for validating my economics professor by demonstrating Gresham's law in a 1.5 billion person laboratory. Because it isn't the value. It is the token of value. It is the representation of value. So it has to be unforgeable. It has to be portable. It has to be useful as a unit of account. And then come the difficult ones. It has to be rare. You can't use seashells as currency if you live on a beach. And yet people use seashells as currency in the mountains. We find archaeological dig sites where people, ancient people, used seashells as currency, never on a beach, always in a mountain, because they're rare. And they use crystals and quartz and minerals on the beach, because they come from the mountain. As long as it doesn't exist where you are, it's a great form of money. And that's one of the big problems we have with our money systems today. Because I have bad news for you. The rupee is not rare. It has no limit. It can be created in infinite quantity. It can be created in infinite quantity just like the dollar, the euro, the yen, and all other monies. These can be created in infinite quantity. And worse, the power to decide how much of that to create is vested in the people who have a direct conflict of interest. Because if you are a debtor, then you want the money to be worth less so that you have to repay less. If you are a saver, you want the money to be worth more so that you can earn more on it. If you give the government that is the biggest debtor of all the decision of how much the money will be worth, they will print an infinity of money in order to make sure it's worth nothing. And in the process, they transfer wealth from savers to debtors. And in a culture of savers, that's a terrifying thought. You have to explain it to people in a very calm way. So we say little nifty tricks. We tell people, there's a rate of inflation that will not exceed 2 or 2.2% per year. Sounds innocuous. 2%. What's 2%? I don't even know what 2% is. I didn't pay attention in school. It has something to do with hundreds and division. I was never good at division. 2%. What does that do? If you tell people the rate of inflation is 2%, they go, 2%, 10%, 5%. I don't really understand that. Let's rephrase that. In 10 years, half your money will be gone. Holy shit! Now that I understand. I've been saving like crazy. I work 2 jobs. I barely get paid. Half of it will be gone. Where? Where does it go? Inflation took your money. More accurately, the government, the corporation, the bank that is in debt took your money through inflation. Because for them, now the money they owe is also worth half in 10 years. What a brilliant construct. And that's where we see a fundamental difference between Bitcoin and traditional money. Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin is store of value. Bitcoin is means of exchange. Bitcoin can be unit of account eventually. It gradually acquires these characteristics as it grows more stable, more well-established, more well-adopted. As more people participate in the exchange of value through Bitcoin, they create an economy. That economy creates value. That value creates stability. It creates liquidity. It reduces volatility. The reduced volatility makes it more suitable as a means of exchange for smaller and smaller purchases. It makes it better as a store of value. As a means of exchange and store of value increase, its velocity increases. The same unit gets transferred many times by people doing many trades. And eventually, its value stabilizes to the point where it can become a unit of account, where you can say, one of these talks is worth half a Bitcoin. And I don't price it in dollars anymore, I price it in rupees. I can't do that today. It's too volatile. But one day I'll be able to do that. One day I'll be pricing my Bitcoins in Bitcoins. People ask me, how much is a Bitcoin worth? The correct answer is 1,000 millibits. And there will come a day when the question will not be, how much is a Bitcoin worth? But the question will be, how much is a rupee worth? And then I'll say, oh, it's a microbit. And that's when you know things have changed. It will happen very, very slowly, and then all at once. Because there's something special about a global currency. And here's the magic trick. 21 million. That's the limit. It's mathematically imposed. There are not many currencies that can do that. There's only one thing in the world that shares the characteristic of a fixed, diminishing, geometrically reducing supply that cannot be modified no matter how hard you try, because the more you try to extract value from it, the harder it gets. And that's gold. Except you can't email gold. And you can email Bitcoin. And suddenly, you notice that this thing may have a bigger impact than any of us participating in it could even imagine. And people will point at that and they'll say, it's fake money. It's not real. And the market will give it a value, and in the end, that value is the truth. You can use currency controls, propaganda, lies, restrictions, laws. We see that in Venezuela, right? They're doing all of those things. They're pointing at Bitcoin and they're saying, that's fake money. And anybody who's involved in Bitcoin in that space points right back at Venezuela and goes, oh no, yours is the fake money. This shit is real. Because I can buy food with it. From Amazon, delivered to Colombia and smuggled across the border, but I can still buy food with it. Fake money can be resolved by the market. We are at the very beginning. This is not an investment opportunity. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is a technology. It's a technology that has radical, disruptive implications for the world at large. It creates, for the first time in human history, the possibility of the free flow of money to anyone, anywhere, at any time, without any restrictions, controls, or central authority. It creates the possibility of the free flow of money for all of humanity. And that technology is going to be difficult to use. It's going to be weird. It's going to have attacks. It's going to have hacks. It's going to have failures, just like the internet, which used to go down all the time in various parts. And some of the companies that are in the space will not exist 10 years from now. That also happened with the internet. In 2000, 90% of the companies in the space were wiped out in a single stock market washout. But the internet didn't go anywhere. It just found new companies to build the next generation. And that will happen in digital currencies too. We may change the name, We may change the companies that are participating in. We will certainly change the technology. And in the end, digital currency will happen, has happened, and will be a fundamental part of the future of humanity. And absolutely nothing can stop that from happening because it already did.